Hello YouTube, hello Instagram, hello world. I actually wanted to talk about one of my favorite movies, Waiting to Exhale. And Waiting to Exhale is one of those movies that, depending on how old you are, you'll get a different perspective of the movie. I had the type of parents, they kind of let me watch whatever, and it was no filter with them. So it was kind of a blessing and a curse. But I actually saw Waiting to Exhale for the very first time when it came out. That was my mother's her favorite movie, one of her favorite movies. She's very religious, so for her to watch that, she loves Whitney Houston. Like anything Whitney Houston does, my mother is a big, huge Whitney Houston fan. And when Whitney Houston passed away, I didn't realize she was so young, because like my mom, both my parents are 66, and a lot of people from that generation love Whitney Houston. But Whitney Houston, if she was still alive, she would be 58. So she's a little younger than a baby boomer. She's like Generation X. But the baby boomers, they love Whitney Houston. Like anybody that's from the older crowd, they love Whitney Houston. Generation X, it's kind of so-so with them. And then in my generation, it's kind of so-so. I love Whitney Houston. She was definitely played in my household a lot. But the very first time I seen it, I was in first grade. So naturally, I'm a kid, so I don't really know about relationships. I don't know anything like that. The second time seeing it, I remember being in high school. So it had been 10 years since it came out. I graduated high school in 2007. And I remember watching it like in 2004 or 5. And it actually, I think it came on BET. And that's when BET started having like better movies. It wasn't just hood movies, but they started playing like Tyler Perry movies. They started playing like really good movies on BET. So watching it as a kid, I didn't really have an opinion. I just loved the soundtrack. Like even as a youngster, I just always loved the soundtrack. And it's not just one of the best movies in black culture, but it's also one of the best soundtracks. Fun fact. So Whitney Houston called Brandy to do Sitting in My Room, right? Whitney Houston called Faith Evans to do Forever Kissing You. There's actually 2 parts to that for all of us who follow Faith and Whitney. Whitney does her part, and then Faith Evans does her part. Beautiful song. One of my favorite songs of all time, Forever Kissing You. It's just dope. Aretha Franklin is on the soundtrack, which I didn't really realize until watching it today. Mary J. Blige is on the soundtrack, of course. So this was an epic classic soundtrack. It was just, I don't think we're ever gonna see a movie like that ever again, and we're definitely not gonna have a soundtrack like that ever again. You know, Whitney Houston was a musical genius. And I say that not just because of her voice, but she knew other talented artists. She would call people up and ask them to do songs for this soundtrack. And she didn't have to do that. She could have did the whole soundtrack on her own because she's that good. But she recognized other talents, and she's like, I want Brandy, I want Faith, I want CeCe Winans. CeCe Winans did a duet with her with Count on Me. That's also a classic. She recognized different talent, and that's why I love Whitney Houston so much, because she was just a musical genius, and she like lifted others up with her. So to the perspective, so watching it at 15 and 16 years old, I'm not gonna lie, when I watched Waiting to Exhale, I felt like all of them, it was their fault. With Loretta Devine, I felt like, how do you not know that your child's father is gay or not gay? Like, she didn't know he was gay. So I did a lot of victim blaming. And I think that comes from just my own household. I don't know. But I felt like it was their fault. Like with Angela Bassett, she burning the car. I was like, well, why is she burning the car? Like, first of all, why are you depending on a man? You know, me growing up in my household, I didn't really think that was good. I felt like when you get married, you need to establish yourself financially, because you do have men who change. It's not saying that they're bad men, but if they change their mind, you need to prepare yourself. But me being 33 and my little experiences, I can say I was wrong for thinking that way, for the simple fact, when you get married or when you in a long-term relationship and a man makes promises and he doesn't keep them, that's wrong. If y'all watched Waiting to Exhale, Angela Bassett's ex-husband, he was totally wrong. If your children are in private school and you don't want to be with your wife no more, you should still pay the tuition. Why should the children suffer because you want to do your thing? As a father, you need to make sure that they're still in private school. You need to make sure that they have the $5,000 mortgage. She said the mortgage was $5,000. He was going to give her some money that wasn't enough for that. And there's a scene where she's like, what the hell? Okay, we getting a divorce, but why are you being like this? And if she didn't have her lawyer, she wouldn't have got what she deserved. She put in 11 years and she deserves that money. You know, he, needs to pay up. And now that I'm older and I realize that, it's very important. You know, as a man, okay, you don't want to be with the mother no more, whatever, do you. But why should the children suffer? And so looking at it at 33 years old, he was so wrong for that. He was so wrong for saying, take the $300,000. She's like, that's not enough. The kids are in private school, and the area that they live in and the schools, those are top-notch schools. You know, it wasn't private schools in the hood. Like in the hood, you paying $400 or $500 a month. Private school in the suburbs, some of those, so even back then, tuition back then, we talking $1,000 a month, $2,000 a month in some schools back then. So I can imagine even now, so that was that perspective. I thought the character Robin, her name is not Robin Givens, but her name is Robin in the movie, I believe, with the curly hair. I thought her character was a little different because she was like with men she didn't even like. And then the last one with Leon, he was married. She knew he was married. But in the end, she left him alone because he wouldn't leave his wife alone. That scenario is like, that's like really a touchy one, because it's like the last thing she said is, we don't need you in our lives. She's like, we don't need you in our lives, meaning that she was pregnant. So that's like a really sad, tough situation. And she tells Whitney Houston in the scene when they're at the pool, and she's like, she had an abortion. So this time she was pregnant, she chose not to get an abortion. The other scenario with Whitney Houston, that was one scenario that I always stuck to my gun. From 15 to 33, the mother was dead wrong. And I wanted to talk a little bit about that with toxic mothers. You have a lot of people, a lot of mothers who give bad advice. They'll tell their daughters to stay in a bad relationship. So a lot of the times when people do things, you got to look at their upbringing. You got to look at, what is the mom telling them to do? And in that scenario, the mother was telling her, oh, I don't want you to be alone. And let me tell you something. It's better to be alone than to be dealing with that. And Whitney Houston's situation was the worst, because this man had no intentions of leaving his wife. Like, it was so ridiculous with him. And then he had the nerve to tell Whitney to her face that his wife was pregnant. So it's like, it's bad enough y'all having y'all little affair, whatever. Why would you tell your side chick that your wife is married? Like, why would you do that? You lucky all she did was pour water down your pants. Then he calls her mom crying. And as a mother, you should be like, don't ever call my daughter no fucking more. Because you lied and said you was going to leave her. And now she's pregnant, which means you still married. You're not just legally married, you're actively married. Y'all about to have a baby. And then he had a nerve to be happy about the pregnancy. Also, you did this on purpose. You know, oh, my daughter about to have a little sister. And you tell your side chick this, and she's supposed to be happy with this. Whitney was like, what? Excuse me? Excuse you? I'm done. Like, that's it. Because you're not even trying to get a divorce. Then he has the gall to tell her, oh, wait a little bit longer. What? No, that's wait for what? So you could stay with her and keep getting her pregnant? No, we're not doing that. We're not doing that. And Whitney Houston's mother was so toxic. Like, she's the worst. You don't tell your daughter to stay with an actively married man. Now, if he's not messing with her and he's actually trying to move on, that's something a little different. And even then, a man is not divorced. A man is still married until he's divorced. And for those of y'all that's been through experiences, whatever, y'all know what I'm talking about. A man is not, and even when divorced, you got to be careful with that. Because the Bible says when you lay with a man that's divorced, you commit adultery. And not all people are immature. I'm not going to say that. But in some scenarios, the ex is still jealous. You have scenarios where you can't really, depending on what type of family dynamic, the family may not fully embrace you because you're this new woman. And yes, he's done with his ex-wife, but it's still feelings there. He might be entertaining her, you know, so it's a lot. So I tell my friends that might be, oh, you know, he's previously married. Be careful with that, you know. But in Waiting to Exhale, these men were actively married. These men were having sex with their wives. And in Whitney's case, he got her pregnant. Like, he bust a nut in her. So she was like, I'm done. Like, bye. And the reason why she fell for it is because he called her mom. And that's how they, because she, you know, was done with him. She was like, I'm not dealing with this. And she let him into her life again because of her mom. And she stood up to her. She was like, Mom, I'm 33 and I might be living alone. I have my career. I have my friends. And it was like women empowerment, because the worst thing is not alone. The worst thing is being in a mess. And now that I'm older, I see that for myself. Because if you're raised with a woman that is so afraid to be alone and whatever, then you start to think, oh, but then it's like, no, that's messy. He got her pregnant, and then he's telling her to her face, my wife is pregnant, and happy, smiling. That's some real, that's what you call narcissistic at its best. And so Waiting to Exhale and watching it at 33, you see how messed up these men are. When I watched it at 15, I thought it was the women. I was victim blaming. I'm like, what, Loretta Devine, how she ain't know her baby daddy was gay? Both of the women, and you know, they got with married men. What's wrong with them? And then Angela Bassett, oh, she wrong for burning his clothes. What's wrong with her? No, what's wrong with him? Why would you be married to somebody for 11 years to leave them? Like, who does that? Which means that, because this is one thing I learned about long-term relationships that end. If you have a couple that's been together for 11 years, even if they're not married, and they break up, best believe in year 6 or 7, they wanted to break up. So, it's just, they got the gall to be like, by year 11. So it's essentially you wasted her time. So that's what makes him even more wrong. And then you try to tell her, oh, you gonna get 300,000. She's like, bruh, that ain't enough. Our kids are in prep school, bougie prep school. This mortgage 5,000. No, you're not about to strip me of my lifestyle because you want to be with someone else. That's not fair. And you got a lot of men that try to do that. Like, you provided a certain lifestyle, and 9 times out of 10, you chased her. You wanted to be with her. You begged her to marry you. Yeah, you need to pay up. And me being young and, when I was a teenager in my 20s, I didn't understand that. But now that I'm older, no. If you are a man and you provide, and this is what you promised to do, you need to continue to do that. Right? And I feel like that needs to be verbalized. That needs to be put in paper. All of that. That I will provide. Period. And then on top of that, why would you want the next man to provide? Those are your children. True, she could get a job and do it herself. But why should she? Right? When you married her, she was a housewife, and so why should she get out of her comfort zone because you want something new? That's not fair. So it's like, watch and waiting to exhale. It gives me a different perspective. Always will be my favorite movie.